And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. The National Coalition of Chiefs is a community of pro-development First Nations chiefs that advocate for the development of oil and gas resources in their communities. On today's Open Connection, NCC President Dale Swampy.
I wrote an article, an op-ed in National Post about the acknowledgement of speaking on traditional territories of certain First Nations, so forth, and implying that it seems like it's a good takeoff for some companies, some organizations, and federal government and provincial governments to say that and get off the hook. And I don't think it's right. I think there's got to be more substance behind it. And if you get a chance, just go to our website and you can see all the op-eds I wrote. We did write something on true reconciliation as well. It's all about economic reconciliation. So before I go into the forum, I wanted to give you a brief outline of how the NCC was established. I am from the Samson Cree Nation, and when I got out of college, I started working with my band, thinking, of course, that it'd be a stepping stone, right? And that I'd be out there defeating the world, off the reserve. But about 6 months into it, I realized, and it was the spurring of my sister saying, you can't leave the reserve. We need you more here than you going out in the world and defeating, doing all kinds of things and becoming rich. And it didn't occur to me till about 6 months after, when there was a young lady who had, her baby had died. He was 4 months old. And she had no family structure, and she was on welfare. Her boyfriend had spent all their welfare money. She had no money to buy, milk for a child, so she mixed water with coffee mate and fed her child for 4 days on that. And after 4 days, the child died of lack of nutrition. And it set me aback, and I thought, how could this happen in the most industrialized country in the world? In a world that Canadians, I believe, are the best people in the world. How can Canadians let this happen, right? And as you look more into it, I've never myself grew up in a township, and, walking around there and seeing the kind of things that happen, you commit yourself to helping the nation. And I ended up working for 22 years with my band. 2006, I was recruited by Chief Roy Whitney to help Enbridge build their engagement and consultations department. We started with Fort Hills, moved on to Alberta Clipper, Southern Lights, and then we came to Northern Gateway in 2010. And that's really where the NCC model we fell backwards into. If you asked me in 2006, I would have said, about coalitions, regional coalitions, can they be established and can they make some good? I would have said no, because, in 1962, when the federal fund, or 1965, it should say, when the federal government started funding social welfare payments to First Nations on reserve to supplement their income, they established what they call the Four Nations Administration, and that administration basically handled all of the budgets for everything except one source funding. And it was 1992 when they disbanded. All the First Nations separated from the Four Nations and basically worked on their own, and it was a terrible decision. We had a great recreation center that went downhill. People's started to build their own arenas. They couldn't manage it because it's just too expensive. The health system went downhill. The only thing that survived, was the infrastructure that was built for our residential school system. Can you imagine that? So in 2006, I never really thought that regional coalitions were possible. But when we went to Northern Gateway, one of the things that the owners group wanted was, some ideas on how to get the First Nations to come on side, because six years of Northern Gateway consultation never amounted to anything. They never really got the majority of the First Nations on side with the project. So we said, what we've seen is that First Nations want a long-term relationships. They wanted long-term funding agreements and so forth. So we went through about 28 iterations of a long-term agreement and decided on the free offering of equity. That meant that we would gift to the First Nations 10% of ownership in the Northern Gateway project, and they wouldn't have to finance it or anything like that. And in order to offset the lost revenues and profits that the owners group would incur by giving away 10% of their equity, they agreed to top up the toll rate in order to offset that loss.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. The National Coalition of Chiefs is a community of pro-development First Nations chiefs that advocate for the development of oil and gas resources in their communities. On today's Open Connection, NCC President Dale Swampy.
We introduced it to the communities, and one of the conditions on it was that everybody had the same percentage. There was no ability for them to be able to argue that we should get more because we're closer to the pipe, or we should get more because we've got more people in our membership in our communities, or we should get more because we have a larger traditional territory. We've been here longer. You've seen all the arguments about that throughout the years in traditional territory arguments between First Nations. And what happened was, since that was no longer on the table, the chiefs and the Métis leaders got together and talked about the real things that are important to their community. That was employment, training, community investment, more equity, long-term employment guarantees. And throughout the 6 years that the Aboriginal Equity Partners got together, they were able to negotiate funding for a 30-year program so that they could meet on a regular basis throughout the operation of the pipeline. They increased their benefits from, about 300 million to 2 billion. It included 600 million for their ownership in the company, which increased from 10% to 33 1/3%. And they were very influential. Unfortunately, in 2012, when we asked them to empower the chiefs to support the project, the owners group said, no, you can't do that, Swampy. They said, it'll look like we're buying our support, and we're going to ruin our reputation by doing so. So 2016 came about, and you know the whole story, right? We just got pummeled by the NGOs, and the oil companies and the midstream companies never had a reputation, right? So they empowered the chiefs in 2016 in June to advocate for the project. And by then it was too little too late. We went to Ottawa about 4 times, argued against the tanker ban moratorium and the new C69 regulatory legislation. By November, the project was canceled. So the chiefs were very upset. They wanted to sue the federal government for lost benefits, and they wanted the oil companies to pay for the legal fees for the lawsuit. We met with them maybe 3 or 4 times. In the end, they said, we can't do it, and basically gave the reason that, this is a one-off. This is one project that we're going to write off $640 million as the money that they spent altogether throughout the 60 years of development. Plus, we're thinking of building other pipes, and if we see them, those other pipes may not be built. Well, what happened? No pipes were built there. So the chiefs, instead of getting together and suing the federal government, we got together with late Chief Elmer Derrick and started the National Coalition of Chiefs to push across the nation that the model, the coalition model, the regional coalition model, is a model to be used to build projects and to provide certainty for project developers and to maximize the benefits of First Nations in their negotiations, because one-off negotiations we found just don't work, and you never get the capacity, influence, or ability to get larger numbers of Indigenous inclusion unless you're a regional coalition. So the model was working well. Chief Terrence Paul, for example, in Nova Scotia embraced it. He now has the Maritimes, or what they call the Atlantic First Nations Water Authority. We first started it in Nova Scotia, was with the 13 Mi'kmaq nations, and now it's gone maritime. They just signed yesterday an agreement with the federal government, a long-term transfer agreement for payments directly to the Water Authority. They don't go to the band anymore, they go to the Water Authority. So they have the capacity and the technological expertise to be able to help all these First Nations who have trouble. I've been an administrator my whole life. I was CEO when I left my band. I can tell you right now, we've trained so many people to manage our water and wastewater systems. Every time they get full training, they go off and get a higher paying job someplace else, right? And you're stuck with nobody. And to have a regional water authority where, an administrator can access expertise to be able to manage their water systems, it makes a lot more sense than doing it on our own. So those kind of things are the things that made a lot of National Coalition of Chief members interested in moving forward. Our sustainable community model is something that we promote, and that's starting with power, kind of generating our own regional power authority so that we could have our own power, so we're not dependent on the federal government.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. According to the United Nations 1998 report, poverty is much more complex than minimum amounts of money for sustenance, and at its core is a denial of choices and opportunities. Let us return to the conversation as Dale shares some examples of when industry comes knocking at the door.
Then we have food sourcing, that can be established through greenhouses, through cogens and so forth. Then we have fish farms to be able to do and feed our people proper food and so forth. Then we have authorities like for the water. Then we have construction for our roads and highways, so that we have the expertise, knowledge, and the capacity and equipment to be able to do that sort of thing. And then we have the ability to influence project development, and we have the ability to be able to partner with companies that are interested in doing the same thing that we're trying to do, and that is to get us out of poverty. So we've been advocating for the natural resource industry for quite some time now. We're now in the hearings for the emissions cap. We're going to Ottawa to protest against emission cap. We're working with First Nation LNG Alliance to be able to go, get together and to be a strong force and being in supporting the natural, the LNG system. We think it's a groundbreaking time in this industry to be able to establish these kind of organizations so that we can move forward with more expansion of LNG and so forth. We're having two conferences. One is a clean energy conference. We're profiling the Pathways Alliance project in northern Alberta, as well as Chief Terrence Paul's support for the Newfoundland First Nations, who are in cooperation with energy companies in Newfoundland to build 1,600 windmill project out there. We're working with the south or northeastern Saskatchewan communities to develop the uranium mining industry in that region. NextGen is building probably the biggest uranium mine in the world, and they're on the second year's development on that, and they expect to start construction here next year. So we're very excited about that. We're promoting the 146 renewable projects that are on the books in Alberta, and that's incredible because we did a study, and in that study we found that Alberta alone, because of the oil and gas industry, has the biggest amount of natural or renewable projects coming on board, some $19.9 billion worth of projects, and one of them is going to be the biggest solar project in the world, just outside of Calgary. Calgary has, an asset in the area of being one of the areas that has so much more sunshine in all of North America. Some 300 days of the year, there's no cloud cover in southern Alberta. That's why it's mostly a ranching community, because it's very hard to grow an arable crop in those regions. So we've been developing those type of things. We're also profiling what we feel are companies that help to defeat unreserved poverty through real partnerships, not just revenue sharing agreements or MOUs. We have the Ambipar group here. Maybe guys stand up. A group owned by a Brazilian company who are sympathetic towards First Nations. They have some 15,000 workers across the nation. Ambipar has an environmental consulting arm in their company, as well as hydrovacs for remediation, emergency response, you name it. They're a one-stop shop, so very proud to promote them as well. We're moving forward with our annual Energy and Natural Resource Summit in Calgary, in conjunction with the Global Energy show in Calgary as well, and we expect thousands of people to come out to that. Last year was very successful. We're a major sponsor for the Global Energy show because the chiefs wanted to be able to get into that show and to be able to access all the opportunities they have to meet with partners in the oil and gas industry, as well as mining and forestry and so forth. So we're very, very excited.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Think tanks can be referred to as think factories or policy institutes. The work of all think tanks include conducting scholarly research, creating a space for debate, generating ideas, monitoring public policy, and providing intellectual resources to the public. In this final segment of Open Connection, Senior Fellow of Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Chris Sankey.
I am a Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, where our group is a think tank. It's an international think tank, a national think tank here in Canada. And we actually get first crack out influencing policy in Canada. It's pretty a unique position to be in. And I have to say, there are sometimes government does listen. But it's a lot of fun. I'm also an advisor to the NOC, which is the National Organizing Committee for the Canadian Gas Association, as well as the International Gas Union. We just had our first meeting in London, England, in the UK about 4 weeks ago. And I worked with several incredible experienced personnel around the world. And as well as I was just in Lima, Peru, talking about the importance of Canada's resources and how important it is to get our product to new markets. So that's really what I do. I want to be very clear. I do provide this strategic advice, but I want to be very clear that I don't speak for Indigenous communities or leaders, and I don't speak for industry. I am merely the bridge. Again, I'll keep repeating this. I'm merely the bridge that bridges the conversation between industry leaders and Indigenous leaders, and from there, they're the ones responsible for that dialogue. I'm merely a springboard. I provide advice. At the end of the day, the conversation comes from those two entities. So with that, again, I'm Chris Sankey. As I mentioned, I'm from Loch Coolams, which means Island of Roses. My ancestral name is Wadzine, which means a person that enters quietly. I'm Gisbit-Wada, Gitwat-Gyots. So thank you for having me.
I'm Rob Kopecki. I'm the Manager of Indigenous Affairs with CAP, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. I'm based out of Edmonton, Alberta. Our headquarters is in Calgary. Just a little bit about CAP, and then I'll give a little bit about myself. So CAP represents Canada's natural gas and oil producers across the country and is the trusted voice to ensure Canada is the preferred source of safe, secure, reliable, affordable, and responsibly produced energy to meet the growing needs of Canada and the world. As a nonpartisan organization, CAP works with all governments and all parties to ensure that our industry is long-standing. And we work to support industry's efforts to continue to reduce upstream greenhouse gas emissions. CAP and its members are also very dedicated to playing a role in supporting of Indigenous participation and prosperity in the resource sector. And a little bit about myself. I actually started my career here in Prince Rupert in the early 90s, working for the Ministry of Forests. I spent about 5 years here before moving to Dawson Creek and spent some time there, also working for the Forest Service, and then moved to Alberta in 2014 to become a Director of Consultation Operations for the Ministry of Indigenous Relations out of Alberta, and joined CAP earlier this year in February.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Zach Gauthier. I'm with the Indigenous Resource Network. And my role there is I am a communications coordinator, so I do a lot of work in the media relations, social media strategy, that sort of thing. But to be honest, it's a nonprofit, so you wear a lot of hats. Sometimes I do events, sometimes I do other things. Sometimes I'm here speaking at conferences like this. So just a little bit about the Indigenous Resource Network. We are a nonpartisan, independent advocacy group advocating for Indigenous involvement in responsible resource development. And when I say responsible resource development, I want to make it clear that there are times when an Indigenous community might not see a project that is in their interests, or it doesn't meet their environmental standards. And so part of that is we are not just a speaking head for industry. We want to represent our Indigenous communities and members and businesses. And a big part of that is challenging the narrative of some of the environmental activists, as well as Hollywood actors, as we've seen, who really just keep saying the same line that all Indigenous people are the same and that they do not support resource development, and that is not true. There is obviously a lot of support for resource development, and we really want to challenge that narrative with some of our campaigns that we have going on, as well as some of the work that we're doing, whether it's advocacy within the media and writing op-eds and that sort of thing, or other activities as well. So
We all know that the environmental movement, it's $1 billion a day industry. Can you imagine that? And all they're doing every day is trying to figure out how to spend that money and how to create havoc within our worlds. And if you're a person who believes in sustainable energy transition, you believe in LNG Canada, the plant they have here, and the CGL project, and the 7 South coming in by Enbridge soon as well. So we know that there are over 800 different environmental non-government groups that are funded by philanthropic organizations. And if you look at the oil and gas industry, or natural industry and natural resource industry in total, they're outmatched. There are only 770 across Canada. We can be categorized, the NCC, as a advocacy group. Indian Resource Council can be categorized as an advocacy group, so can CAP, and so can Chris.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.